So let's spend a second here just talking about tools. There's a lot of communication channels out there, and there's been a lot of change. So in the last 5 years. So the question is what do you do to get your messages across, right? So, you know, for large, complex projects, you just have communications. A lot of times you may, in fact, actually need to have a marketing component associated with that. So ask yourself which tools would be the most appropriate to get your message across, okay? And they need to be formatted, by the way, accordingly, okay? Most people don't do that. You think it's kind of a blanket way of doing all channels of communication. It doesn't work that way. So determine which tool best suits your target audience. And you really need to think about that. And you need to think about the demographics of your audience as well, right? Because if you're doing an external program that involves external stakeholders as opposed to just internal people interdepartmentally, you may be doing a child abuse program, whatever the case may be, and your demographics, once again, 18 to 25, 18 to 30-year-olds are going to look at this stuff differently than people that have been in the trenches for a while, or if it's an interdepartmental type of effort that you're doing. It's kind of interesting. Gartner identified some simple mechanisms for project communications. You know, and I have to kind of laugh at this because they're and the one thing they thought that was absolutely essential for project manager or management is face-to-face communications. So some of these seem pretty obvious. I think the one thing you want to ask yourself too, are you a little bit more of an introvert versus an extrovert in terms of your communication efforts? So half of all of this is identifying what your style is as well, okay?
You know, that's not so obvious, really. I've worked in more than one organization that people sitting right next to me, they communicate by email. That is not that obvious anymore.
I know. It's funny. I've had conversations with people by email sitting right next to me, and you could just turn your chair around and talk. And I like to just talk, all right? The thing is, email is an impersonal type of communication, and it is subject to a lot of miscues. And once again, depending on what your writing style is, you know, I tend to be very, not so much abrupt's the wrong word, but you tend to be very quick-fingered on email. So you just kind of get it out without doing a lot of copy, right? So, but the thing is, that's the reason you've got expressions, right? Happy face and all this stuff, so people know that you're actually joking because they can't physically see you. They don't get mad at you, all right? So these are all kind of important things because there's an impartial perspective towards a lot of these things. Some of these communication channels are static, some are active. So ask yourself what's active and what's static. So some of these people are going to come to, and they're going to, they're going to be basically for informational purposes only. There's going to be other sites, for example, and this actually dovetails to our next slide here. If we just look at communications engagement, you know, if you look at websites, you can really break down all of your communications into these 4 areas. So whether it's verbal, electronic, written, or visual, what's going to work well for you? And you need to know the limitations on all of these communications as well. So the one thing I think to keep in mind is, you know, a visualization is actually stronger than a written word. So, you know, and I have to use the example of Ronald Reagan, so speaking of somebody from California, because Michael Devers was his PR man, and he understood this beautifully. You know, this is the reason you saw a lot of mom and apple pie in Ronald Reagan's political campaigns, because he knew at the end of the day the American people would understand and rationalize those images versus what he may have said during the day. So it's an important component to keep in mind in terms of your communication planning. Okay, so the visual is as important as what you're saying, you know. Now, just in terms of communication engagement, the other thing to keep in mind is the message source. So ask yourself, where's the message coming from? So is it coming from the project sponsor? Is it coming from the project manager? What conduit is it coming from? I think the one thing, you know, and you absolutely have to stress with all of these, all projects, a lot of projects will fail because they do not have executive sponsorship, right? So you need to make sure that there's a, you know, consistent top-down message approach for senior management to the rest of the agency on an ongoing basis as well. So people need to sense that support in terms of where you're going. The other thing too here for, you know, for projects, for example, with broader communities, local governments, business industry, or even business leaders, you can also use these people to help you get your message out. I remember years ago when I was at the Department of Commerce during the Reagan administration, we actually had an industry sector group dedicated specifically just to propagating the message in terms of what we were trying to do, okay? And all of these folks were in fact just ambassadors. So we took the PR approach that we want to put you on the road and we want you to talk about this program, and we want, you know, and of course they supported what we were doing because we're trying to support small and medium-sized export businesses. This is what this whole program was about. So you've got people in authority actually speaking to where you need to go and what you need to do, and you know, and then you've got the administrative support doing that. So if you haven't done that, I would suggest that you do that. So you can create the PR plan for them, create all the materials for them, brief them on a regular basis, and help them with their engagement schedule. Okay, so that can really help you push forward a communication program. So, and lastly, it generally gets down to responsibilities in terms of communication engagement as well. So who's really responsible for your communication effort? Is it the project manager? Is it the program manager? Is it that person or a couple people in conjunction with a communication director? Is it, you know, those two in conjunction with an agency head? You really need to designate that person or key committee in order to make sure that the effort moves along accordingly. So with all of that said, we've talked about some communication channels. I'm really curious as to what everyone out there is actually using right now. So maybe you all could share with me some of the tools you're using. So for example, who's actually using the web for more than informational purposes in your agency? Anybody can share anything?
One of our, a project that we're just starting, we have a web page. As to the progress, it's pretty high level, but as it gets more detailed, we're going to you know, be adding in. We're working a lot with retailers, grocery stores, so there's a different section for each of the different, say, audiences of what they might be interested in the project.
So you've actually got a feedback mechanism for them to...
It's not so much a feedback, it's probably more the push. This is where we are on the schedule. This is upcoming events, that kind of thing.
Okay, so do you push it out over the web? So you send out an email?
Yeah, it's a web page.
Okay, so you send out an email linked to a... Yeah,
I think they know that it's there. So I'm not really involved in that piece, but I know that that's there. I haven't gotten involved in it yet. So.
Okay. Okay. What about mobile devices? Okay. Everybody's got an iPhone. You're not doing anything on that end?
Correction, we don't have iPhone.
We don't get iPhones.
They're just regular telephones, right?
Yeah.
Yep.
We are. We're actually in October implementing a mobile application for child support services so that they can make their payments on their mobile app.
Oh, nifty. Nifty. Okay. So what about, you know, I assume everybody uses the traditional techniques. So we all get meeting to death, right? We all have the conference calls, all right? So I'm trying to think of things that are out of the box. And, you know, it's funny because agencies, you know, don't necessarily get funded well in order to be able to do this. You know, on the federal side, it's interesting. All federal agencies were mandated to actually come up with a social media strategy because you have people calling in. So you have services, HHS, for example, people calling in about Social Security payments. They were really behind the eight ball and all of this stuff. So they went through a lot of issues because the driving force on the federal side was people were just coming to work with iPhones, say that you have a security issue. But you also had constituents calling in and saying, you know, can't we respond via our iPhone for what we need to do versus a website? Okay, so you've got some driving things there as well. So is there anybody actually looking at this? We've got a couple examples here in terms of some, we'll call them cutting edge types of social media thing. So does anybody else actually have a CIO who's actually cognizant of all of this stuff?
Well, I work at the state teachers retirement system, and are not related to IT, but we've put up specific websites for messaging about a specific issue. We're about to deploy a mobile application. We send tweets out. We have a Facebook page, but that's not, our structure is a little bit different than through a traditional CIO.
Well, yeah, tweeting is. Most people kind of go. My kids do that, right? Sort of thing. But it's gone mainstream. So you need to think about that, and you need to think about it. You know, if you look at some of these things, so you look at Facebook, MySpace, YouTube, you look at Twitter that you just mentioned, RSS feeds. I use those specifically for news media. All right. So if you've got a program, and this is just, you know, it's kind of like in politics, it's opposition research. So you can set up your RSS feeds. And if you're doing an external program and you're looking for press, because stuff gets picked up on different wires, all those feeds will bring that right back to you. Okay, so that'll give you some immediate intelligence of what the perception is for perhaps your particular program that's out there.